The envelope was thicker than it needed to be. Cream paper. Embossed letterhead. My family's attorney's name pressed into the top corner like a quiet threat. I remember the exact time because I checked my watch twice. 9:17 a.m. Sign it before noon, my brother said, not looking at me. It'll make this easier for everyone. Easier. The word echoed in my chest like something hollow. We were seated in conference room B at Harlow and Kent, a glass box overlooking downtown, 42 floors up. My father sat at the head of the table, fingers steepled, expression patient. Too patient. The kind of patience that expects surrender. Across from me sat 3 attorneys. Beside me sat no one. The document in front of me was titled, Sworn Deposition, Statement of Admission. Page 6 was tabbed. I flipped to it slowly. Paragraph 14. I acknowledge that I acted beyond the authority granted to me as interim director and accept full responsibility for the financial irregularities outlined above. Irregularities. That's what they were calling it. $28 million rerouted through a subsidiary I created. A subsidiary the board approved. A subsidiary my father insisted was experimental and risky when it began outperforming his flagship division within 9 months. Just admit you overstepped, my brother added casually, scrolling through his phone. The judge will appreciate the honesty. Honesty. I looked at him for a long second. He couldn't hold eye contact. My father cleared his throat. You're not built for public battles, he said evenly. This protects the family. There it was. Not the company. The family. My humiliation had been scheduled between 9 o'clock and 11:30 a.m., followed by catered lunch. The deposition wasn't about correcting wrongdoing. It was about isolating me. Legally. Publicly. Permanently. If I signed, I would absorb all liability. Civil penalties. Regulatory fines. Potential disqualification from serving as an officer in any public company for 5 years. My father would remain chairman. My brother would assume operational control. And I would become the cautionary footnote. Sign it, my father repeated. Calm. Controlled. Final. The attorneys shifted slightly. One uncapped a pen and slid it toward me. The room was quiet enough to hear the faint hum of the ventilation system. I read the paragraph again. And again. Every word had been engineered. No criminal admission. Just enough civil responsibility to poison my professional future. Strategic. Clinical. Brilliant, actually. The humiliation wasn't loud. It was procedural. I'd like to review the supporting exhibits again, I said. My father's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. You've had them for weeks. I'd still like to review them. Silence. My brother exhaled sharply. We're trying to help you. I looked at him. By asking me to confess to something that hasn't been proven? It's already proven, he replied quickly. Too quickly. One of the attorneys interjected smoothly. The regulatory inquiry is progressing. Cooperation now will influence outcome. Influence. Not determine. Not resolve. Just influence. I closed the folder gently. I won't sign today. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. My father leaned back in his chair. For the first time that morning, he looked directly at me, not through me. This is not a negotiation, he said. It isn't, I agreed calmly. It's a deposition. A flicker of irritation crossed his face. My brother stood abruptly. You're being stubborn. You think the board is on your side. I didn't answer. Because that was the first time I realized something important. They believed I was alone. Not legally. Not financially. Alone. And that belief made them confident. Confidence makes people careless. My father gathered the documents neatly into a stack. If you refuse, he said quietly, we proceed without your cooperation. I understand. His gaze lingered. There was no anger in it. Only assessment. As if recalculating risk. Very well, he said finally. The court will draw its own conclusions. The meeting adjourned without handshakes. As I walked out, I caught my reflection in the glass wall. Steady posture, neutral expression, hands relaxed. No one would have guessed that my pulse was hammering. In the hallway, my phone vibrated. Unknown number. I answered. Is this Daniel? Yes. This is Judge Renshaw's chambers. We've received an unusual procedural request regarding your case. I stopped walking. What kind of request? A brief pause. Your board chairman has requested direct judicial clarification before the deposition is entered into record. My footsteps slowed. My board chairman? I asked carefully. Yes, the clerk replied. He said the court should be aware of certain material omissions before accepting any admission. Material omissions. The words settled slowly. My father was chairman emeritus, but he was not current board chairman. There was only one person who held that position now, and he had been unusually silent these past 2 weeks. I see, I said. The judge has scheduled a review for Thursday morning. Thursday. 2 days from now. The clerk added, almost as an afterthought. He sounded firm. The call ended. I stood in the quiet corridor, the city stretching endlessly below the glass. Inside that conference room, my family believed they were controlling the narrative. They believed the deposition would corner me. They believed silence meant weakness. They didn't know a call had already been made, and they certainly didn't know who had made it. Thursday morning would not be procedural. It would be clarifying. I slipped my phone back into my pocket and walked toward the elevator. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself a small breath. Not relief. Anticipation. Because if the board chairman was calling the judge directly, then someone much higher than my father had decided the truth should be heard. And my family had no idea what was about to surface. The first time my father told me I wasn't ready, I was 19. We were standing in the warehouse behind our original manufacturing facility, the one with the cracked concrete floors and the old analog clocks that always ran 3 minutes slow. I had just finished my second year studying finance, and I'd built a simple forecasting model that cut raw material waste projections by 12%. I was proud of that number. 12% meant something in our industry. I showed him the spreadsheets printed neatly in a binder. He flipped through them without expression. Then he closed it and handed it back to me. You think too small, he said. Real leaders think bigger. It wasn't dismissal. It was repositioning. He didn't say I was wrong. He just implied I was insufficient. That was his style. By 24, I was overseeing regional distribution. By 28, I was negotiating vendor contracts worth 8 figures. And every time I achieved something measurable, he adjusted the metric. You're efficient, he'd say. But efficiency isn't vision. You're analytical, he'd say. But you lack instinct. You're steady, he'd say. But you don't inspire. The praise always ended with subtraction. My brother, on the other hand, was instinct. He was bold, charismatic, impulsive, and forgiven in advance. If he missed a projection by 10%, it was ambition. If I exceeded mine by 15%, it was caution. The board meetings were where the pattern became public. I remember one in particular, May 14th, 9 a.m., quarterly review. My division had just posted a 22% increase in operating margin after restructuring supply chain contracts. When it was my turn to present, the room was attentive. Slides crisp. Data clean. I finished in 22 minutes. Silence. Then my father leaned forward. Impressive optimization, he said. But optimization doesn't create empires. The room nodded slowly. And, just like that, performance became small. My brother presented next. His proposal involved entering 3 emerging markets simultaneously, high risk, high exposure, minimal due diligence. The board asked cautious questions. My father smiled. That, he said, gesturing toward my brother, is scale thinking. Scale thinking cost us $6 million that year. It was written off as strategic experimentation. That was the moment I understood something important. In our family, narrative mattered more than numbers. So I stopped arguing. And I started building quietly. The subsidiary wasn't born out of rebellion. It was born out of arithmetic. I ran projections at night from my apartment kitchen table. Conservative models. Stress-tested scenarios. Vendor mapping. Regulatory frameworks. I didn't hide it. I submitted the proposal formally. September 3rd, for 17 p.m. Board approval came 2 weeks later. Unanimous. Even my father voted yes. He called it a sandbox initiative. Limited exposure. Controlled experiment. What he didn't realize was that the market was shifting faster than his legacy contracts could adapt. Within 6 months, the subsidiary was profitable. Within 9, it outperformed 2 of our legacy divisions. Within 12, external investors were calling me directly. That's when the temperature changed. Not publicly. Subtly. Board members who once CC'd me started looping my father instead. Financial reviews became more granular, but only for my division. Internal audits increased. Compliance inquiries surfaced. Nothing overt. Just friction. The first time irregularities was mentioned was in a private executive session. My brother leaned back in his chair and said casually, "There's concern about oversight." "From whom?" I asked. He shrugged. People. That word again. Vague authority. Manufactured doubt. I requested specifics. They postponed the discussion. 2 weeks later, an external regulatory body opened a preliminary inquiry. Timing is rarely accidental in corporate environments. The inquiry focused exclusively on intercompany transfers between my subsidiary and the parent company. Transfers that had been documented, approved, audited, but complex enough to sound suspicious if explained poorly. And complexity, I learned, is fertile ground for narrative manipulation. That's when my father suggested we get ahead of it. "We control the message," he said during a private dinner at his house. "Admit procedural overreach. Pay a fine. Move forward." Procedural overreach. He framed it as strategic sacrifice. "Take the hit," he said. "You're young. You'll recover." Recover. From what? From success? I declined. Politely. And that's when I saw something I hadn't seen before. Not anger. Concern. Because the subsidiary's growth wasn't just profitable. It was directional. It represented the future of the company. And the future didn't center around him. The board chairman, however, had been watching quietly. He rarely spoke during meetings. Late 60s. Former institutional investor. Measured. When he did ask questions, they were surgical. He requested detailed breakdowns of my revenue models twice. He never challenged the legality. Only the scalability. 3 weeks before the deposition request, he invited me to lunch. No assistance. No agenda. He asked one question. "If your subsidiary were independent, what would its valuation be?" I gave him the conservative estimate. He didn't react. He simply nodded and changed the subject. That was the last private conversation we had before the regulatory inquiry escalated. And now, suddenly, he had called the judge. Directly. Board chairmen do not call judges lightly. Not without documentation. Not without confidence. Back in my apartment that night, I reopened the financial models. Line by line. Timestamp by timestamp. Everything was clean. Meticulous. Documented. But something else stood out. A transfer authorization dated 4 months ago. Approved by my brother. Rerouted through a holding entity I did not control. The amount wasn't enormous. But the pathway was unusual. Unnecessary. And buried. I stared at it for a long time. Then I cross-referenced email logs. There were gaps. Not deletions. Redirections. Someone had been moving quietly inside the system. And for the first time, I wondered, was the deposition designed to shield the company? Or to redirect scrutiny? Thursday was no longer just about my name. It was about exposure. And if the board chairman had seen what I was starting to see, then my father's confidence wasn't strategy. It was miscalculation. By Wednesday afternoon, my father was calm again. That's how I knew he believed he still had control. He called a special executive gathering at headquarters, not officially a board meeting, but close enough. Senior leadership, legal counsel, compliance officers, and 2 external advisors filled the long walnut conference table on the 38th floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows. Filtered sunlight. Catered coffee service. The optics of stability. I arrived precisely at 2 p.m. No one greeted me. Not coldly, just neutrally. As if I were already transitioning out. My brother stood near the presentation screen, jacket unbuttoned, projecting ease. "We're just aligning ahead of tomorrow," he said when I took a seat. No surprises. No surprises. I folded my hands on the table. Good, I replied. He launched into a summary of the regulatory inquiry. Controlled tone. Strategic pauses. He framed the deposition as a proactive measure, a demonstration of transparency. Daniel's admission clarifies procedural misjudgment, he said smoothly. It protects shareholder value. He didn't look at me when he said it. Several executives nodded. One of the compliance officers avoided eye contact entirely. Then my father spoke. We built this company over 37 years, he said. One division's experimentation cannot jeopardize that legacy. Experimentation. He was careful with language. The subsidiary was now a reckless deviation, not a board-approved initiative. I let him speak. Silence is a discipline. After 30 minutes, the floor opened for questions. Most were operational. Projected fines. Insurance exposure. Market reaction scenarios. Then, unexpectedly, the board chairman entered the room. He hadn't been on the calendar. Conversation thinned instantly. He walked in without hurry, carrying a slim leather portfolio. No assistance. No visible tension. He took a seat at the far end of the table. I won't take long, he said calmly. My father's posture adjusted almost imperceptibly. We're simply aligning ahead of tomorrow's procedural review, my father offered. I'm aware, the chairman replied. He opened his portfolio and removed 3 documents. Not thick binders. Just 3 sheets. He slid them across the table toward legal counsel. I've requested judicial clarification because the deposition references financial irregularities that appear to be inaccurately attributed. The room tightened. My brother leaned forward slightly. Inaccurate how? He asked. The chairman didn't answer him directly. Instead, he addressed the compliance officer. Can you confirm who authorized the April 12th intercompany transfer through Halcyon Holdings? The compliance officer froze. Eyes shifted. April 12th. I kept my expression neutral. That was executive authorization, the officer replied carefully. Whose executive authorization? The chairman asked. A pause. My understanding was it fell under Daniel's subsidiary authority. The chairman turned one of the documents toward the center of the table. It did not. My father's voice entered, controlled but sharper now. That transfer was minor and operational. Minor, the chairman agreed. But structurally significant. He looked directly at my brother. The authorization signature matches yours. The air in the room felt thinner. My brother didn't flinch. It was routine liquidity management. Through a holding entity not disclosed in the subsidiary's reporting structure, the chairman asked evenly. That entity was pre-existing, my brother replied. Legacy structure. Legacy structure. The phrase lingered. The chairman folded his hands. The regulatory inquiry is tracing pathways. If Daniel signs a blanket admission tomorrow, liability consolidates under his authority. That would be convenient. No one moved. My father's jaw tightened. Are you suggesting misdirection? He asked. I'm suggesting precision, the chairman said. There's a difference between accusation and clarification. He was choosing the latter. And that made it harder to attack. The room's energy shifted subtly. Executives who had been passive were now alert. This wasn't about youthful overreach anymore. It was about structural transparency. My brother attempted a small smile. We're overcomplicating this. The deposition simplifies exposure. For whom? The chairman asked quietly. Silence. I watched faces carefully. Legal counsel was reviewing the documents again. The compliance officer looked pale. My father straightened in his chair. Tomorrow's hearing is procedural, he said firmly. This conversation is premature. On the contrary, the chairman replied, it is precisely timed. He turned to me for the first time. Daniel, have you reviewed the transfer logs personally? Yes, I said. And? They don't align with the narrative presented in the deposition. Understatement is powerful. My father stood slowly. We are not litigating this in-house, he said. No, the chairman agreed. We're clarifying it in court. There it was. Not a threat. A timeline. Thursday. 9:30 a.m. Judicial review before the deposition could be entered into record. My brother's confidence wavered, just slightly. He hadn't expected scrutiny this early. He believed the admission would be filed quietly, framing the inquiry around my authority. Instead, documentation was surfacing before consolidation. The chairman gathered his portfolio. One more thing, he added before leaving. I've requested a full forensic audit of all holding entities connected to executive authorization over the past 12 months. The word forensic does not echo loudly. It settles. Heavy. He exited as calmly as he entered. The room remained still for several seconds. Then voices resumed, softer, fragmented. My father looked at me across the table. Not dismissive now. Calculating. He realized something. If the audit expanded, control would shift. Not to me, but away from him. As the meeting dissolved, my brother approached me near the doorway. You think you're protected? He asked quietly. I think the truth is durable, I replied. He studied my face. You're making a mistake. Maybe, I said calmly. But I didn't look away. Because for the first time in years, he wasn't certain. And uncertainty is where arrogance begins to fracture. Tomorrow wasn't going to be about my admission. It was going to be about attribution. And someone in that room had just realized the spotlight was widening. Thursday, 9:30 a.m. Courtroom 4B. Public record. And this time, I wouldn't be the only one under oath. Courtroom 4B was colder than I expected. Not physically, the temperature was neutral, but atmospherically. The kind of cold that comes from polished wood, controlled voices, and consequences that arrive in measured tones instead of raised ones. 9:28 a.m. My father stood near the front row, speaking quietly with counsel. Navy suit. Silver tie. Composed. He looked like a man attending a routine procedural clarification. My brother sat beside him, scrolling through his phone again. Casual. Almost bored. They believed this was containable. I took my seat at the defense table with my attorney. The board chairman entered at 9:31, alone, and sat directly behind us. That positioning was not accidental. The judge entered shortly after. Counsel, Judge Renshaw began, adjusting his glasses. I've received a request from the company's board chairman to review certain documentation before accepting the defendant's deposition into record. He looked toward my father's legal team. Who would like to begin? My father's attorney stood smoothly. Your Honor, this is a straightforward matter. Mr. Hale has agreed in principle to acknowledge procedural overreach within a subsidiary he directed. The admission allows regulatory resolution without prolonged litigation. In principle, the judge asked. Yes, Your Honor. We anticipate formal execution pending minor clarification. I remained silent. The judge turned toward my side. Mr. Hale, have you executed the deposition? No, Your Honor. And do you intend to? Not as currently written. A murmur rippled faintly through the gallery, mostly observers, a few journalists. Corporate disputes rarely draw attention unless they smell like something larger. The judge nodded. Very well. Chairman Whitmore, you requested this review. Proceed. The board chairman stood. He didn't rush. He approached the lectern with the same calm he carried in board meetings. Your Honor, he began, the deposition attributes certain intercompany transfers to Mr. Hale's authority. However, documentation indicates executive authorization originating outside his subsidiary. He handed a folder to the court clerk. Inside were transaction logs, time-stamped approvals, digital authorization trails. April 12th, May 3rd, June 19th. Each routing funds through Halcyon Holdings, a legacy holding entity not listed under my subsidiary's reporting structure. The judge reviewed the first page. Counsel, he said, looking toward my father's attorney. The attorney stepped forward, scanning the copies provided. These transfers were operational liquidity measures, he replied. They do not alter the broader issue of oversight. The chairman remained composed. They alter attribution, he said evenly. The judge looked up. Who authorized these transfers? Silence lasted half a second too long. My brother shifted in his seat. Executive Committee authority, my father's attorney answered. Specify, the judge said. The chairman spoke again, voice steady. The digital signature corresponds to Executive Vice President Andrew Hale. My brother's name sounded different in that room. He stood slowly. Yes, Your Honor, he said. But those transfers were routine. Daniel's subsidiary benefited from them. That is inaccurate, I said calmly. Every head turned. I didn't raise my voice. The subsidiaries' accounts were reconciled independently. These transfers were rerouted before reconciliation. My father's expression hardened slightly. The judge leaned back. So we have a deposition asserting responsibility for financial irregularities under Mr. Daniel Hale's authority, he summarized, yet documentation suggests executive actions outside that authority influence fund movement. Yes, Your Honor, the chairman confirmed. My father finally spoke directly. This is being exaggerated, he said, controlled but firm. We are discussing internal structuring decisions. The deposition streamlines liability. For whom? The judge asked. The question hung there. My brother's confidence began to thin, not collapse, just strain. We are protecting shareholder value, he said. The chairman responded quietly, by concentrating regulatory scrutiny onto one division head. No one answered. The judge flipped another page. There's also mention here of a pending forensic audit. Yes, Your Honor, the chairman replied. Authorized by unanimous board vote yesterday evening. That was the first moment my father's composure cracked, subtly, but visibly. Unanimous, he repeated. Yes, including independent directors. Directors my father had assumed were aligned. The judge closed the folder. It would be inappropriate to accept any admission until full attribution is established, he said. This court does not facilitate convenient liability transfers. The words were clinical, but devastating. My father's attorney attempted one last angle. Your Honor, delaying resolution increases market uncertainty. Accuracy precedes certainty, the judge replied. Silence. Then he looked directly at me. Mr. Hale, you are under no obligation to execute this deposition. In light of new documentation, I recommend restraint. Restraint. I nodded once. Understood, Your Honor. The hearing concluded in under 40 minutes. But reputations can shift in less. Outside the courtroom, reporters waited. Microphones subtle but present. My father walked past them without comment. My brother followed, jaw tight. The chairman paused briefly beside me. Silence, he said quietly, remains your strongest position. I know, I replied. By afternoon, financial news outlets were circulating headlines. Board blocks deposition in Hale Industries inquiry. Executive authorization questioned in internal fund transfers. Nothing accusatory, just uncertain. And uncertainty erodes confidence faster than accusation. At 4:12 p.m., our stock dipped 6.8%. Not catastrophic, but noticeable. Investors dislike opacity. And now, opacity had direction. That evening, I received a call from my father. No greeting. You've made this public, he said. I didn't call the judge. You encouraged it. I provided documentation when asked. A long pause. You're damaging the company. No, I said calmly. The truth is clarifying it. His breathing slowed slightly. You think the board will protect you? I think they'll protect themselves. Another silence. He understood that. Boards protect value. And value follows credibility. When the call ended, I sat in my apartment, lights off, city glowing through the windows. This wasn't victory. It was exposure. The forensic audit would begin tomorrow morning. 12 months of transaction mapping. Every holding entity. Every authorization. And if the patterns extended beyond April. If Halcyon Holdings wasn't the only reroute. Then this wasn't about my subsidiary at all. It was about something much older. Something buried beneath legacy structures. And if that surfaced publicly, the deposition would be the least of my father's concerns.